Welcome to this worship service of the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock in Manhasset, New York. I'm Suzanne Viverito, a member of the congregation and a worship associate. Ours is a congregation of people with different theological beliefs, but shared values. Foremost among them, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Within the framework of our shared values, we covenant to respect each other's beliefs and spiritual practices. Each Sunday, we take a little time to consider together a theme or topic that connects us to our values so that we can live into them more fully and with deeper spiritual insight. In today's service, we consider together the idea of vulnerability. Our special guest is Reverend Tamara Lebak. Reverend Tamara is an ordained UU social justice community minister, diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, coach, prison chaplain, and former associate minister of All Souls in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She is the founder of the Restorative Justice Institute of Oklahoma, where she strives to help people know they are not the worst thing they have ever done, nor the worst thing that has ever happened to them. Now, let's center ourselves as we enter into a time of worship. People with different beliefs who worship together as one faith.
Good morning. I am Reverend Tamara Lebak, and I'm coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I come to you from the home of the Cherokee, the Muskogee, and the Osage nations, as well as the Caddo, Wichita, Quapaw, Kiowa, Comanche, Plains, Apache, Pawnee, and 30 other tribes who called this land their home before forced removal. It is my pleasure and honor to be with you worshiping this morning. Our opening words are from our hymnal, number 420, the words of Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature so that creation need not play to an empty house. Come and let us worship together.
Each Sunday, we light the chalice of our religious heritage. We do this for our ancestors who taught us through their various religious traditions and by their actions for justice and hope. We do this for our children who are learning the traditions we teach and who learn more from our actions than from our words. We do this for ourselves to remind us of who we are and who we seek to become. This flame symbolizes the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need, this do we affirm and covenant with each other.
In our Unitarian Universalist congregation, we covenant to plant seeds of care and compassion. We hope to grow strong trees of justice. One of the ways we live into these actions each week is by taking up a collection for organizations which seek to bring help, hope, and healing to individuals, families, and communities in desperate need of greater justice, equity, and compassion. This collection today is for the annual school supplies drive for the children of the village of Hempstead whose parents are incarcerated. The organizer of this drive is ABBA, Able Body of Believers Alliance, an organization founded and directed by Reverend Reginald Benjamin. While ABBA's major focus is job training for returning citizens and others who struggle to find employment, Reverend Benjamin believes in responding to the needs of the entire community. One vehicle for this response is the school supplies drive every summer. Your donations will help purchase needed educational items for these children, thereby supporting their efforts to grow in mind, body, and spirit. There are 3 ways you can donate: through our website at UUCSR.org, over text at 516-210-2528, or through PayPal. Please give as generously as you are able. In this time of even greater need, thank you for your compassion and your generosity. Together, may we continue to build a more just and joyful world.
It's not simple to say. Most days I don't recognize me. These shoes and this apron, that place and its patrons have taken more than I gave them. It's not easy to know I'm not anything like I used to be, although it's true I was never attention's sweet center. I still remember that girl. She's imperfect, but she tries. She is good, but she lies. She is time. She's all of this mixed up and baked in a beautiful pie. She's gone, but used to be mine. It's not what I asked for. Sometimes life just slips in through a back door and carves out a person and makes you believe it's all true. And now I've got you, and you're not what I asked for. If I'm honest, I know I would give it all back for a chance to start over and rewrite an ending or two for the girl that I knew who'd be reckless just enough, who gets hurt but who learns how to toughen up when she's bruised and gets used by a man who can't love. And then she'll get stuck and be scared of the life that's inside her, growing stronger each day till it finally reminds her to fight just a little to bring back the fire in her eyes that's been gone but used to be mine. Used to be mine. She's messy, but she's kind. She is lonely most of the time. She is all of this mixed up and baked in a beautiful pie. She is gone, but she used to be mine.
We have two readings this morning. Our first is from Genesis 3, verses 6 through 10. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was there with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." The second reading is John 21, verses 1 through 8. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, and it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed him in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. are we really? Who are we beyond the layers that we use to keep ourselves safe? In a world that can be unkind, oppressive, abusive even. A world that is so often unfair and unjust. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples at first did not recognize him. Now, this was actually the third time that in John that Jesus had appeared since the crucifixion. And you know about the rules of three, right? It usually means, especially in a biblical context, wake up. Well, you're about to hear something important, it tells you. Peter wanted to go fishing the night before and invited the disciples to come along. They'd been fishing all night long in the dark with no luck. And that morning, Jesus called out to them, "Children, have you any fish?" And they answered, "No." Jesus then says, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat and you'll find some." So they cast the net on the right side, and I imagine that's out into the sea and not toward the beach. And then they were barely able to haul in the net because there were so many fish. No one had recognized who was giving them such sage advice up to this point until that disciple, it is written, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, obviously, Jesus loved all his disciples equally, just like we love our children. But I imagine he really loved, this was particularly smitten with, this disciple who was able to recognize his spirit alive in the world after he had died. This disciple got it. May we all be so attuned. So that disciple whom Jesus loved says to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now, Peter hadn't recognized Jesus up to this point. Peter, who goes on to build the church, the one who tries to institutionalize the Spirit and who so sadly and so often gets it wrong. But Peter has such good intentions. Peter, such a character, a fisherman chosen by Jesus, gets to walk on water, witness the transfiguration, who can't stay awake, this Peter, who denies Jesus, is restored by Jesus, and then gets to preach on the day of Pentecost. Peter is just so human, so fallible. So Peter finally understands that it was Jesus telling them to fish on the other side of the boat. So he immediately puts on his clothes and jumps out into sea. Now, we were told that he was fishing naked, that all of the disciples likely were. Now, there are some disputes about whether they had on underclothes or not, but back then, if you were a fisherman or a carpenter or any of the working class folk, you likely only owned one good set of robes. And if you were going to be casting out heavy nets all night long, you wouldn't want to get them all sweaty. And robes are not the easiest things to be able to throw nets in. But Peter, he's just always fascinated me so much. Peter sees Jesus, puts on his robes, and jumps into the water to swim towards Jesus. While the other disciples do the hard work of dragging in this net full of fish, Peter dives into the water, weighed down by his robes, and swims to shore. There is just so much in this parable. One lesson, if we're going to recognize Jesus, that spirit of love and truth and justice, if we're going to recognize this spirit that is alive in the world over which death has no dominion, that spirit of hope and access to the holy, we ought to imitate the beloved disciple and, in fact, stay vulnerable ourselves. We must continue to do our hard work naked. Not literally, of course. Taking scripture literally is frankly irresponsible. As Karl Barth says, I take the Bible far too seriously to take it literally. Now, to imitate the beloved disciple, we do our work vulnerably. Now, this parable also teaches that if we want to be abundantly successful, to haul in a bounty, We must listen to that spirit inside of us and what it tells us to do, to be vulnerable, to explore unfamiliar territory on the other side of the boat. The disciple who recognized Jesus was naked, and he stayed that way. Did he cover himself in the presence of God? Did he weigh himself down? No, but Peter burdens himself with layers of clothes and then makes a 100-yard swim a much more difficult one. Now, I, in my teens, actually served as a lifeguard. Part of the training was to jump into a pool with all of my clothes on and to tread water for 15 minutes. This is not an easy task, mind you. They also teach you how to take off some of your clothing to use as a kind of buoy to hold you up, especially in treacherous waters or in an emergency. Swimming in jeans and a t-shirt and tennis shoes is hard enough, but in a heavy robe, it would actually entangle you, keep your arms and legs from moving freely, weigh you down and fight against you. So he dives in, and I imagine head first, struggling with every single stroke, and emerges on the beach before Jesus, exhausted, his clothes drenched and heavy. Why does Peter put on his robes to swim? Well, that's who Peter is, and I believe to make a point. Jesus reminds us in this story to pay attention. What might be getting in our way of reaching the way and the light and the truth? What might be keeping us from easily finding a way, seeing the light, or discovering the truth? What layers might we have put on that bog us down or may even make us feel like we're drowning? I have a few suggestions. You likely knew I would. Maybe it's layers of shame or pride, fear or formality, our own clinging to expectations or the need for certainty. All of these layers have good intentions, and they might have kept us safe and warm or covered or in control or even hidden at some point in our lives in some other context. But there is no reason to hide yourself before God. If what you're doing is important and holy and on the path, then your vulnerability is required. It's almost laughable to assume that you could hide behind a robe or even a fig leaf from our truest self or from a higher power or from God. I love this story about Peter in John 21 because not only are we reminded to be vulnerable, but the scripture also reminds us to take a look at where we are casting our net. If we only cast towards the shore, toward the familiar and what we think we already know, we just might miss the abundance of the sea. Are you with me? Now, maybe 2,500-year-old stories about naked fishing aren't your cup of tea. Maybe this book has been used as a weapon or an agenda to control you or your relationship to the holy. So let me offer a more modern day parable of sorts. It's actually a true story about a friend of mine who was an avid fisherwoman who had a moment of vulnerability of her own that I have never forgotten. Now, she's a Texan, and at the time she was in her 20s. So likely she was feeling pretty invulnerable, probably because of her age in her 20s and also due to the culture of her home state. One evening, she went fishing on the Brazos River near dusk with what she considered at the time to be only the essentials: beer, cigarettes, a lighter, and fishing tackle. So later, peaceful, still, satiated, and relaxed, and a few beers in, she began to notice that it had become quite dark, really dark, actually, and it was getting cold quickly. Looking up in the direction from which she had come through the woods down the bank to the river, she could no longer see where she had made her way down from the road. She realized that in order to get back to her car, she would actually have to scale up the steep and muddy bank and make her way back through the dense wooded area in complete darkness, with only half a pack of cigarettes, a lighter, and now several empty beer cans. A state of panic overcame her as she tried to feel her way along the bank, the moon hidden and offering no help. Now, let me just pause here for a moment. People, this was a Texas river. So I don't know if you've seen hillbilly hand fishing, but that would give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. There were holes to step in, there were roots to trip over, and water moccasin to fear. This was real danger. Now, after a few stumbles, she paused, terrified, to consider her options and get a hold of herself. And then she realized exactly what she needed to do. She would have to burn an article of clothing to light the way. So she started with her sock. She carefully managed to wrap it around a stick and set it on fire. It burned brightly and fast, but it was enough for her to manage to make up the bank about 15 feet into the woods. So then came her other sock, and she transgressed 20 or so more feet. She was in the middle of the woods as the second sock flame burned out and she couldn't see a thing. And so she set fire to her shirt. Even crazier than the fact that she had just set fire to her shirt is that my friend was not alone. So it was not just one person who thought this was a good idea. My friend actually convinced someone else this was a good idea. So after her own shirt grew dim and smoldered, her friend then offered the shirt off of her own back. Finally, certain that this was the only way, laughing and scared but vibrantly alive, every piece of outer clothing charred and on the ground behind them, my friend set fire to her shorts. The two girls emerged onto the road where salvation awaited in the form of a pickup truck. They made the 1-hour drive in their undergarments, praying that no one would stop them before they made it home. Now, the lesson learned at the time was very literal. Clothes burn faster than you think they might, and never, ever forget a flashlight when you go fishing. But the meaning over time has become more about resourcefulness and vulnerability. If you're in the dark about how to proceed, the fastest and the most resourceful and creative way to get through is to get vulnerable. Dr. Brené Brown is a social worker and shame and vulnerability researcher, and a great resource to learn about shame and vulnerability, perfectionism and leadership, and I would argue even to learn about the impact of white supremacy culture on white people. But according to Dr. Brown's research, when she asked people to complete the sentence "vulnerability is," these were the kinds of responses that she received. Standing up for myself. Asking for help, saying no, changing jobs, starting my own business, helping my 37-year-old wife with stage 4 breast cancer make decisions about her will, initiating sex with someone that I love no matter how long that we've been together, hearing how much my son wants to make first chair in the orchestra and encouraging him while probably knowing that it's not going to happen. Calling a friend whose child just died. Signing up my mother for hospice care. The first date after a divorce. Sharing a story I wrote or a piece of art I made. Waiting for the biopsy to come back. Coming out. Admitting I'm afraid. Standing up for myself and friends when someone else is gossiping. Being accountable. Being an ally. Asking for forgiveness. And having faith. Now, do these responses sound like weakness? Think about the moments in your life when you have felt brave, Vulnerability, Dr. Brown writes, sounds like truth, but feels like courage. The irony is that courage is actually born out of vulnerability, and vulnerability actually makes us stronger. It's courage and therefore vulnerability that actually gets us out of our own wilderness, that helps us see the path to God or to our truest self, that brings in the abundant catch. But we have been trained otherwise in this world. We want strength without vulnerability. But plowing ahead without vulnerability just makes us tough, not strong, thick-skinned, calloused, and therefore not capable of feeling anything, joy or pain. So many people are confused about the difference between tough and strong. It took me a while to learn as well. But courage comes from the French word for heart, cœur, and requires that we stay connected emotionally, and I would argue spiritually as well, as yet another compass point. Courage requires that we be open in our heart, that we bare our bellies a little bit, that we be vulnerable. And in the face of difficulty, if we choose to run away, to be disconnected from ourselves or from another, and instead attempt to add another layer of protection, it might actually feel like we're drowning. When we choose to layer on protection or are not willing to let go of those outer layers, we become tougher, not stronger. And instead of feeling courageous, we feel shame. In her research, when Dr. Brown asked about what vulnerability feels like, this is what she found. Taking off the mask and hoping the real me isn't too disappointing. Taking off a straitjacket. Taking the first step toward what you fear the most. Many people suggested that they know it's happening when they feel the need to strike before being struck. Pay attention to this one. When you feel like you want to be aggressive, what the situation is actually calling for is vulnerability. Because what wanting to strike first means that we are feeling fearful. And the solution is not aggression, but connection. And that connection comes from vulnerability. So whether or not we connect to or are vulnerable with the person we're fearful of depends, of course, on the threat. But regardless if it is getting vulnerable that will get us through. The number one answer Dr. Brown found in her research that vulnerability feels like, the responses were that vulnerability feels like being naked. Bearing all of ourselves for the world to see. Being vulnerable is about the willingness to show up and be seen in our lives. And in those moments when we do show up, those moments become the most powerful, the most significant moments of our lives, even if they don't go well. When we're willing to get clear about what is most important, what we're willing to let go of, our deal breakers, we can hold on to what we must, our integrity or compassion or our core values, and set fire to the rest to light the path ahead. And so let us begin with our socks. What have you been holding on to that you could offer up or share with someone close to you, a friend or therapist or minister, that would lessen your burden or light the way, that is just begging to be witnessed, that could make you struggle less? The cost, my friends, of not being vulnerable, the cost of disconnection, of thicker and thicker skin, is high. When we're not vulnerable, that very lack of vulnerability results in us feeling as though our lives have no meaning or no purpose, little joy, little happiness. It's frightening. But having faith Being a person of faith means standing naked before God, and you don't have to do it alone. When you're called to fish naked, God will be there, pointing out where to find the abundance. When you're in the wilderness, God might be asking you to fish naked. Now, here's the good news. Courage is contagious. So what feels like vulnerability to us, to others, looks like courage. So we spread courage around and encourage others just by showing up and being vulnerable. Now, I want church to be a place where this is nurtured and encouraged. Are you willing to help? Are you willing to set fire to your socks to light the way? Maybe it's time for you to try fishing naked. May it be so. It has been such a blessing being with you this morning. Go in peace. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born to you of gratitude and of hope. May you use those gifts that you've received and pass on the love that's been given to you. May you be contented knowing that you indeed are a child of God. Let this presence settle into your bones and allow your soul the freedom to sing and dance and praise and love. Go and be blessed and be a blessing. Amen.
Now we extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into all the world.